Hi, I hope you guys are well. I just really quickly want to keep this video short and kind of to the point, but I just wanted to kind of throw out a few tips and examples and ideas related to goals and objectives. And I have a couple different examples of grants I've written and to show you kind of the goals and objectives section and how sometimes they're a little bit different for different grants. And one of the first things I just kind of want to mention out that basically you should have your overarching goals, and a lot of times you can take the goal, the kind of language even for the goals from the granting or funding agency, um, the RFP, and kind of use them in the setup of the goals. And sometimes the goals are pretty straightforward and basic. So, like on the example I have here, this was a project where we were going to bring together students from India and from Pakistan to spend some time in a project at Ball State, and you can kind of see the first one is just basically that just very general goal, and then each goal generally is broken down into a set of activities. Now, it's always challenging to do this, and I'm going to show you some different tables and ways to kind of potentially set it up. But a lot of times these are done literally in tables. And one of the readings for this week, the workbook kind of gave you some good examples of how to create a table or to set up your goals and objectives. Sometimes you can include your timelines directly with those. I think in this grant we put up the timelines a little bit differently. You can kind of see we have the goals written on the left, and then so uh, it's the goal is numbered number two, and then the first objective. Your objectives are ways in which you meet that goal, or you're developing your activities or things to meet that goal. And so 2.1, 2.2, 2.3. And this is really, I think, a process that you kind of go back to throughout the process. So you write your goal, you begin to write your objectives, and then you keep kind of going back through and revise your objectives or activities that are laid out to meet that goal. Now, again, these can vary dramatically depending on the type of project you're proposing, but sometimes what you'll realize even is let's say you're going to include a survey or some preliminary research as one of your early objectives. Well, you might really kind of through the process realize that you need to do that activity to develop your grant. So then you would kind of eliminate that from, and then use that data in the grant in the kind of narrative for the goals, and then you would actually set up your goals and then your objectives. You would sort of revise them to meet that. Some other things, generally speaking, that you do with your goals and objectives is you think very clearly about the timelines, when you're going to conduct those activities. Some other things, sometimes, like for this grant, it was kind of like where they would be located, when they would be carried out. So it's thinking through not only the more like broad things, that you're going to do, but also the way in which you're going to meet those things. So you want to have the broad sort of conceptual framework, which is the goal, generally speaking, and then the way you're going to meet those things. So here's one example. I'm going to try to show you another one. This is another one we set up. Um, so you can kind of see some of the background here. Um, and then there's a timetable as the first part that lays out the development of research tools, things like that, when those things will be completed. I just wanted to mention with the timelines, you want to be conscientious about these. I'm reviewing grants right now, and I think one thing that the grant review panel that I worked on took off points for a number of the grants was that they seem to get, I don't know if lazy is the right word, but just they would just sort of use very generic, like we're going to accomplish all these activities by the end of year one. Well, it just kind of gives the reviewers a really hard time to think through, like, and it conveys that the person who wrote the grant didn't really think through exactly, how the project would take place. I think maybe they were thinking that they were going to develop a more sophisticated timeline, if the grant was funded. But it always helps to give the reviewers a good vision of the project if you can kind of give them a very specific breakdown. So in this example here, you can see the way it's broken down into goals, objectives, and then also activities and outcomes. And then the measurement, how we're going to measure our outcomes and things like that. And I think that's another key point here, that a lot of times when you're writing your objectives, you want to almost foreshadow or think about, like, how am I going to measure these? And so one of the things that means too is that as you do your evaluation plan, you might go back and tweak and revise um, your objectives and your goals, so that they can be measurable, or that you do have some measurable outcomes that you can include in your project. Um, One of the things that I wanted to mention too, and I don't think it was so much with these grants. And maybe that's something we should actually, if we, you know, this one's still under review right now, and it made it to the second round, so I guess it's doing okay. But one of the things to include sometimes in these are baseline data, and I think we do that actually in other sections. But and I don't know if that's touched on as in much detail in the readings as I would have liked, but a lot of times, like, what reviewers will think to themselves are you know how are they getting their goals and objectives, why are they thinking about these things? And so part of that's developed in the needs statement. Your needs statement should correspond to your objectives and your goals. But two, if you can include baseline data. So if you're doing a program that feeds a number of different people, or sets out, or wants to do that, or teach them about nutrition and things like that, how many people are the organization that you're working with? How many people are they currently serving? How many people do you think of that number that you can provide services to? So start to have like you want to think about a correlation too between your needs assessment, and then how you develop your goals and objectives. Another key factor with goals and objectives is you want to make them both ambitious but attainable. So you don't want to have something where you're going to say, every student is going to master, some certain skill or something. If it's a hard thing to do, if it's implausible that every student will learn to do that, then you want to set a reasonable goal. You want the reviewers to think you have a reasonable expectation and kind of vision of what's going to happen. Um, so, and again, each one here is sort of broke down into different ways. And then I'll show you one more here. Um, and I don't know if you can see all of it in here, but we have sort of the goals listed, point one, and then objective 1.1, 1.2. Um, and sometimes some of the preliminary goals and objectives, they have to do with doing the research, and developing more of that baseline data. But the more you can include that your goals and objectives are based on information and facts you already know, the better. The more background knowledge and things like that you develop, um, the better. So, and again, here you can see sort of the breakdown of goals, objectives, and then activities, um, kind of throughout. Um, and then another thing that you want to do again is to have a bit of a narrative in relation to your goals and objectives. You want to sometimes, as the lead in, provide a little bit of background knowledge. Before you have the table, along with the table, you also want to have a bit of a narrative explaining why are you focusing on these specific goals. Why did you set these as your primary factors? And it could be based on a number of different things that I've already sort of mentioned a little bit or alluded to. One are the values of the sort of funding agency. So you can sort of kind of want to lay claim to them. I mean, you don't want to just say, "Look, I'm just trying to do what you want me to do." You want to kind of suggest to the funder that your values or what you're intending to do are consistent with their values, and you think because they're consistent, you sort of identified these as things that you're focused on, and then some other things to do or reasons are based on research and an understanding of the need. Um, if there is high poverty and certain health issues related with high poverty concentrations in certain areas, um, then that's the reason you've established the goal of A, B, or C. You've sort of laid that out as a goal in relation to the need and the need statement. So that's why, logically, generally, goals and objectives precede your need statement, your statement of need, because they're developed sort of in tandem. And then later on, again, down the road, you're going to have an evaluation plan that kind of aligns with your objectives. So I know this is kind of short and to the point, but I just kind of wanted to throw out some of those primary ideas, and give you guys some examples to go through. If you'd like me to go through these in a little more detail or hit on some other topics that you're unsure of, please let me know. Um, I'd be glad to try to help or look over your goals before you submit them. Thanks.